Hello and welcome to this tutorial from Escape Studios. Today we'll be looking at how to give somebody laser eyes, just like Superman in the new Batman v Superman. We're going to make our own version of Superman's heat vision, but rather than deal with the horrifically long render times that come with attempting to make particle fluids glow, this is a quick and easy alternative using After Effects. We're mostly going to be focusing on tracking and particles to get the desired effect. And if you're a complete beginner, don't worry, you will be able to keep up with this. We're going to go through everything. Now, let's quickly just give you an idea of what we're aiming for. And there we go. We have our actor doing his best heat vision look. And feel free to use any footage you like. You can make it a bit more jazzy, jump around a bit, but this is the footage we have right now. So let us create a new project. So we've got our blank scene. If you have a different layout, you can come up to Window and just click Workspace, and I'm just using the standard one. And right to import footage, most important thing, you come over here, right click, and you can hit Import and File, and then you'll have to look to wherever your footage, whatever folder your footage is. Mine is automatically loaded. Also make sure that you've got this sequence checkbox here ticked, otherwise you'll just bring in a single file, and you do also want to be working with an image sequence rather than like a movie file. We can say OK. Now, just a couple of things before we begin. Very important to check that After Effects has read your frame rate correctly. Thankfully for me that is correct, but if yours is not right, you can right click over your footage, come down to Interpret Footage and Main, and there you go, you can change your frame rate there. If you've got 24 or 30, make sure that it matches. We'll just say OK. Next thing to just quickly check as well is our project settings. So if you come up to File, Project Settings, you want to be using frames as the time display style. It's just, it's a much nicer thing than having to look at the time code. And we also want to be working in 16 bits per channel. I know it's going to take up more space, but it also means that we lose less information when we do color correction and whatnot. So, OK. Now, to create a new composition, easiest way is to just left mouse click your footage, drag it down here, and there you go, you've created a new composition. And we can right click and rename it to something. Maybe we just want to call it Laser Eyes. And there we go, so it's named as Laser Eyes for us. Now, the first thing we want to do is actually to track. So I've got this little tracker window open here. If, for example, you don't have it, you can come up to Window and hit Tracker here. And there we go. And with our footage selected, we want to change our motion source to that footage. And we want to click on Track Motion. And here we go, it will create a little tracker for us. So we want to track his right eye first, so we can just move this, whoopsie, move this over his eye, and we can zoom in on his eye. Now, if you are unfamiliar with 3D tracking softwares or packages, this inner box here is the pattern that the tracking software is going to be looking for. And this bigger box is the search area between frames that it's going to look for this little inner box in. Now, generally, you don't want this to be too big because you might have other patterns that are very similar to this. And if they pass into this, this is likely to jump around. Also, it just takes longer for it to look. And I mean, the only time you really want to have a massive search area is when you've got a lot of motion blur in your footage, so like the object moves a lot, and in which case then yes, you do need to have quite a big search area. But that should be all right for us. And we can then just come down to this tracking window and click Analyze Forward, and it will follow the point down. And because I've zoomed in, we're just going to see his eyebrow dancing around. And for that to finish. And jumps a bit at the end there. Now, okay, that was actually not a bad track, but you can see, so these are sort of each of the frames. You can see it's quite a smooth motion, and suddenly out here we get a bit of a sort of jiggle. And I know that happens to be where he blinks. So there you go, see it's jumped off. Now you can actually manually move these points if you just sort of go onto the frame and move them up, and it will automatically sort of keep them in that position. So we can just quickly sort of move these into position, like so. It's very, very quick and dirty tracking. You wouldn't tend to use After Effects for tracking. There are other softwares out there, especially if you want to put sort of 3D in the scene, that you would use. But this is perfect for what we are doing. There we go. This is just to quickly just get these in the right ballpark. Just one little frame off there. Then we can just check it through. There we go. It's kind of staying where it needs to be. Brilliant. You can also down here, if your timeline is too sort of zoomed in, you can drag this out to zoom out, and there you go. It's got the entire sort of composition in it now. Right, I'm also then just going to undo this flag here, come to motion trackers and just rename this. Right click, rename, and let's just call it right eye. Very important to name stuff as you get confused. And let me just quickly, again, if the footage selected, if you double click on it, you can say none to your current track and hit track motion again, and it'll create another track point for you. I'm going to do exactly the same thing with the left eye. So I'm just going to pause this, and you're just doing exactly what we've done before. Okay, so the left eye even has finished tracking. Just play that through, voila, kind of sticks where we need to go. So let's again just rename this tracker to left eye, and there we go. Now we're going to create, if you right click down here and new, we're going to create a null object. And nulls are essentially just invisible layers. There's nothing there, but this is very useful to use as a placeholder for what we're going to do with our particles in a little bit. So let's just rename this again. We're going to call it right eye, and create another one, null object, and rename it and call it left eye. Okay, so now back on our track, we're going to come over and we want to make sure we're going to do the right eye first. So we're going to select right eye as current track. So that's going to choose that tracker. And we want to select edit target. And there we go, it's going to right eye. So you see we've got the two ones we just created. Say OK. And then we want to come down and hit apply. It'll come up with this motion tracker apply options, apply dimensions, X and Y. We want to say OK. Brilliant. And so now you see we've got this little square that follows the eye. And we're going to do exactly the same thing with the left eye. So we come back, click back on our back plate, double click, and we'll open it up again. And we can select left eye. And then edit target. We want to select left eye and OK. And apply. And again, OK. And there we go. We've got two boxes attached to our eye. Fantastic. We don't actually need these to be visible, but there we go, we can turn them off. Right, now comes the more exciting part. This is going to be the particle bit. So we can right click down here, create new solid. Doesn't matter what color it is, but let's call it again right eye, and we'll call it particle beam, something like that. And okay, and there we go, we get this black solid created. Now there's different ways of getting it. You can either type things in here. I'm just going to use the menus up along the top rather than any shortcuts or anything. So effect, simulation, and notice we've got particle systems 2 and particle world. We're going to be using particle systems. Particle world is actually a 3D particle system. but it deals with, unfortunately, it deals with its dimensions differently. It doesn't do them based on pixels, whereas the particle system does. And for what we're going to be doing with sort of pick whipping, which is sort of expression animation technique, we need to use the particle systems. So we'll just create this, and it's a 2D one. Now, if we just hit play, you'll notice we just have a lovely little firework in the center. Now, we actually want to attach this to his right eye. So, the source. So if you come here, we've got this little producer, and it's got a position node. We can just hit this little target, and we're on frame 1, and we're just going to hit it to the center of his eye, like so. And now we're going to open up the flags underneath the right eye here. So open up transform, and then also under effects, particle systems, producer, and there we go, we've got this position there. Now if you alt click on that little stopwatch next to position, alt left mouse click, and then you've got this little circle which is the pick whip spiral even. You can just left mouse click and drag it down to the position underneath the right eye on that null layer that we created, and you get this little expression pop up. Don't worry too much about that. But what you will then notice is that he has a firework eye. Brilliant. Okay, not as bad as it looks. So we want to change the technique, the sort of some of the little parameters here. So for our birth rate, again, this will depend entirely on your own scene. But let's just put something in like 10. And we also come onto this little particle. I'm just going to open up everything. Under physics, we do not want it to be explosive. We want it to be direction so that it shoots out in one way. And we also, there's this little extra thing. I'll sort of show you what that does later, but it kind of makes a bit of a particle spread. So we turn that off. There we go. Now we're getting just now we need to just change the direction. So, I don't know. 87, maybe 98. Yeah, that kind of works. Now if we play this through, now you see all the particles are falling down. That is because whenever you create a system, it automatically gives it gravity. We don't want any gravity. These are laser beams. They're not affected by gravity. And longevity. So this is how long your particles live for in seconds. I actually want them to die off quite quickly. Maybe like 0.5 or something. As I say, this will depend entirely on your scene. I'm also going to just increase these radius ones so that it more matches the kind of size and shape of his eye. So maybe like that. Let's just test this. There we go. Okay, that's kind of working. It's kind of what we want. Doesn't look like it, but it is. So we're also going to add, we want them to move very, very quickly, so we'll give them some velocity. So there we go, they're moving much faster now. And we also want to change our particle type. So we don't want it to be a line. I quite like the look of motion polygon. It gives these sort of bursts out, these very rough shapes, but we'll get rid of those. So let's just change these, the sort of birth size and death size. If your death size is too small, you'll notice that he'll get there's a sort of a graduated size. So actually I might just make this a bit bigger, 0.3 or something. Size variation, maybe pop the opacity up. And here we can also change the color of the eyes. This won't actually matter too much because when we add a glow to it, it kind of disappears, but you know, you can just put something in here. Okay. Right, that's kind of, we can come back and change these, but that's kind of, looks all right for the time being. Yeah, why not? Okay, so now we want to actually add a blur to this because this is very choppy here. And a good one to use for this is if you come Effect, Blur and Sharpen, let's do a directional blur. Let's give it a value first. There we go. Oh, there you go. Now you can see it's really, really blurry. And we also want it to kind of point in a different direction. Maybe not exactly where the beam is going, but just about. So we're about 98 before. Let's do that. Yeah, that works. Random numbers. We can also, this random seed creates a bit of sort of noise into your scene. I can just shove anything in there and it sort of messes up the birth of your particles. Brilliant. Right, next thing we want to do is we don't want him to be shooting out the beams the entire way through, because there's a very definite part where he, if we just turn this layer off, where he then sort of looks and we maybe want the beam to start up there. So if we come down here, and this is, this is really easy animation stuff. So we just kind of open this up. You can hit this stopwatch here, which is auto keyframe. So whenever you change a value, it will pop a keyframe down. We can just turn that on and say about here, we want the birth to be 0. And then maybe a couple of keyframes along. We can always change this again, pop it up to 10. And you'll notice it creates these little keyframes, these little diamonds. Those are the keyframes. And before he smells at the end, so maybe put that to 0, and we can add another little one there of where he's got full strength. There we go, we can turn our little stopwatch off. Let's turn our frame back on and see what we've got. So, okay, particles start shooting out. Okay, maybe we actually want to, and then you can just click and drag these along and it will kind of change. There we go, that kind of works. Again, as I say, it will depend entirely on your scene. But there we go, we've just set some very simple keyframes on there. Now, the next thing we're going to do is, just to make our life a bit easier, we're just going to copy this layer. So you can just Control-C, Control-V, and we create a new layer. And let's just call this one Particle Bloom. So we're just going to kind of break up that very samey sort of beam in the center. And we can... Oh, actually, forgetting something very major. Forget about this, just delete this one actually. We want to add a glow, completely forgetting about the glow, the most important part. And if we come up to Effect and Stylize, it can add our very important glow that I clearly forgot about. So, you can here we get these glow parameters. Let's put the threshold down a bit. But maybe we want the radius to actually be quite wide. Obviously, the wider the radius, the less strong it is. But we want to have quite a sort of nice burn there. We can also up the intensity a bit. Also going to change these to A and B colors, so we can then use this. And again, this is entirely your own decision if you want to have green laser beams or whatnot. Let's just quickly pop some colors in there. There we go. Kind of a reddish laser beam. Right, okay, now brilliant, we're done with that. Let's now do what we're doing before. Copy and paste this layer. Let's rename it to Particle Bloom. And we can now just play around with a couple of these parameters. So we can actually, let's change the particle. I think something else. It might be quite nice. Let's turn off the other beam. And what do we have? Bubble. Quad, polygon, cube. Oh, I quite like the look of cube. Kind of like slightly fiery effect. Why not go for that? Let's up the birth rate a bit so we get a bit more. And we're getting a nice flamey effect. I quite like that. And we're just going to maybe change the depth size down so it's not as big. Yeah, that works. If we want to change this, I think actually maybe change the radius up a tiny bit too. I kind of want to keep these the same, hence why I copied the layer, because then you don't have to do the tracking to the eye again. You can just, it's a cheat way of doing it. But we will, however, want to change the glow a bit, so let's maybe lower this down. But maybe we want to have a wider spread. So there we go, now we have a really sort of bright red glow to it. Maybe pop the intensity down a tiny bit so it's not too horrifically obvious. And again, play around with the colours. Or we can even leave them. Right, let's just see how this looks. So that's kind of what we've got. Now, if we are in the particle bloom layer, we're just going to change the layer style, so how it kind of looks, how it adds them together. So if you right click, come up to blending mode. With light, you often use add. So let's just do add. And there we go, we're getting slightly, but maybe we want to actually increase the kind of the range of it. So you can actually come up to this extra. You want it to be very small. And there you go. Oh, there we go. It kind of breaks it up slightly and gives it a sort of flamey effect. Oh, should have started a bit later. Okay, there we go. There we go. We're kind of getting slight swells. So imagine this kind of molten laser coming off, whatever it is. I'm actually thinking I might just alter these colours a bit so we can get a bit of a different effect. Maybe you want to make this a bit darker. I don't know, something like this. Make this a bit more orange. Okay. Oh yeah, there we go. Make that white for the death, or near white for the death colour. Maybe lower this down. So I'm just playing around with different parameters just to get an effect that I like. Kind of makes it a bit more flamey looking. Okay, there we go, so we're getting slight colour variation there. Next thing we're going to look at is the heat haze. So I'm actually going to duplicate the back plate now, or you can even drag down. This is, I'll just duplicate it, easier. So we've got two back plates. I'm just going to rename this one to backplate heat haze. If I could spell it would help. And we're just going to add some turbulence to this to make it look a bit kind of wobbly. So if we go effect, and I believe it's under stylize, is it? Trying to remember where it is. Nope, it is under effect and distort. And here we go, we have this turbulent displace. Use. There you go, it sort of makes it a bit wobbly. Gives them crazy eyebrows. Okay, so let's just change some of these parameters here. Let's maybe up the amount a bit so it's more obvious. Let's also get this a bit bigger. And complexity, we definitely want to up that too. Oh, there we go, now we're getting this sort of really warped craziness. That should do. Again, change it as you want. As you would like, kind of do your own thing with it. We can just turn this off for a second. Again, we're going to do our favorite thing of duplicating our already pre-made layer. So let's just duplicate that again. We can turn these off, so we're just looking at this one. And let's just rename it to, call it heat haze. There we go. Okay. So we don't actually need a glow on this, we can just select the glow and just hit delete. And we can come around and just play around with these again. I actually want it to be a lot more particles. So there's, oh no, not that many, maybe 30. We also want them to last a bit longer, so let's maybe double their time so that they're there. And come down to just open up these flags again. Velocity, I'm not actually wanting to be moving too quickly. Producer, maybe you can up this a bit as well so that they have a bit more Y kind of movement. This is where I'm going to also play with this extra again. Let's make it like 0.1 or something. There you go, so you see it's spreading out quite far. And what else? We can still use the cube, maybe we can make it a bit bigger too. There we go. Oh, so it's really like, oh, it's actually quite big. Maybe take it down a bit. Just compare it with the shot. Actually kind of want it to appear for a bit longer, so maybe we'll try, maybe we'll actually keep the velocity up. Oh, it's quite, we could even try changing it to maybe like a faded sphere or something. I actually quite like the cube. We could turn this down a tiny bit. There we go. That's kind of, we're essentially just wanting to get a bit of rippling in there. Yeah, that'll do, that'll do. So now we're going to just drag this layer down so that it's above this backplate heat haze. Turn on that backplate heat haze. And you notice you've got this toggle switches / modes thing down here. If we just hit that, we can. Okay, so we're just going to come down, so we're on the backplate, and you notice we've got this none. Just going to change that to Luma Matte. And you won't notice the difference because we're not actually where it's being keyed to start, but there you go. So we're getting this kind of warping, so it's kind of like acting like a mask. So we don't actually need to have that layer on. We can turn these others on, and there we go. Sort of getting our whole beam coming down there. Alright, next thing we want to do is we want to make his eye glow, because right now he's just got very plain eyes. So we're just going to create a new solid, and this time, again, name it something. Be like right eye glow, and let's give it a random color. Maybe we want it to be slightly orangey or something. Hey, okay, brilliant. I'm also just going to down the opacity just so that we can see through it a bit easier. Let's go to the first frame, and this is going to look a bit odd, but I want this to be positioned over his eye because we want to track this. I'll just pop it like that. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to come up here, we're going to use a mask just to mask out his eye. So I'm just going to use the pen tool, zoom in, and actually we might really, thinking about it, we might actually want to scoot along a bit to where his eye is actually kind of opened up. So yeah, let's just come along here, shove that over his eye, his pupil, and let's just do the mask from here. So let's cut this along. I'm doing this very roughly. Take your time with it. And there you go. So now we've sort of got a mask of where his eye is. Kill. Let's remove that very. Let's out also, so we can now you see whenever you use something, you create a little flag underneath the layer. So we come to mask. Also add a bit of a feather so that we don't have such harsh edges. Random number 11. Right, there we go. And we're going to do our favorite thing of pick whipping back down to our right eye. So if you remember, if you alt click on the stopwatch, get the little swirl, drag it down to the position of the right eye, and voila, we should have our mask kind of following the eye around. There we go. Let's actually just turn these other layers off so we can see what we're doing. So turn the heat haze off for a sec. Okay. Okay, so let's make his eye glow. So we've got it selected. Come up to Effect, Stylize, and Glow. And then we're just going to play around with a couple of these parameters here. Actually, lower this down a bit. What's great about this is you could just come back and tweak things as you go along and think, oh, that needs to change. It's very simple to do. Let's also put some interesting colours in here. Okay. Something like that. And then we want to keyframe the eye to start glowing just before the beam comes on. So we can come down and turn our beam on, and it is already going full pelt over there. So just bring it back. So we probably want it to be off by here. We don't want his eye to be glowing, so we just undo these flags again. Come down to the opacity. We're going to put the auto key on, auto keyframe. Bring this down to 0, Of course, as soon as the value changes, it will set a keyframe. And right about here, we want it to start glowing. And then we could, if we decide actually it's glowing too much, we can then just drag this little keyframe along, and that'll lessen the amount of time it sort of burns up for. There we go. And we also need to do the other end as well when he turns it off. So it'll definitely be off by this point. And maybe we'll just scroll a bit further. That will probably be the last time it's showing. Oops, how if I put the extra 0 in? There we go. Okay, now you can see here the eye is very orange because that's the colour we initially made that solid. So this is another one, a simple thing you can do is if you come up to Effect and Colour Correction, we can use one of these here. Let's just use a hue saturation. Click on that. And now we can tweak that sort of orangey colour of the eye. If we want, we can maybe take the saturation down a tiny bit as well and lighten it. Can even then also tweak our glow slightly. So it's just a kind of coming back and deciding what looks better. There we go, we'll leave that for the timing, we'll come back and tweak it as we go on. Next thing we want to do, so we actually want to have the eye, kind of the glow behind the beam, because it looks a bit weird having it on top. So we'll just drag this, we'll close up this right eye layer and just drag this down beneath the beam. So the beam's kind of over the top, and then you're actually not really seeing it that much. So this is where I would actually copy this glow layer and leave one on the top above. So the copying is a bit easier so that we keep the keyframes that we put in before. And then we can also just tweak these to maybe just make it a sort of more washed out glow. But it sort of will show up over the top. A bit more orangey maybe. It's very orange. So it's really just a matter of kind of tweaking around. Now I'm doing these colours very roughly. Obviously you'll spend more time trying to get the right look. I'm just kind of randomly picking random things on there. See, that's a lot more red, but I'll just leave it like that. Okay, so something else we can also do is we could change the blending mode of this. Now it depends on what view you've got visible down here. You can switch this and you'll go back to this, or you can switch and you'll see this. Let's keep it on that one, and you can then just right click and come up to blending mode and just play around with what looks best. Obviously I need to work on my colouring of this, but that's not too bad. Even a screen, yeah, like that could work. Okay, now the next thing to do is to repeat all of this for the left eye. So I'm going to pause the video, do that. I mean, you're just essentially working through what we've just done, but doing it for the other side. And then the final thing will be to add that all-important movie lens flare. Okay, so here we go. We've done both eyes. I've tweaked a couple of the colours as well, and some of those values and the glow to try and get them to match a bit better. Now, you know, you've got two beams kind of right beside each other. You can't actually really see through the first to the other, and you imagine you would because it's so hot. So what we can do, and also just before that, you can see the way I've laid it up. So the things closest to the camera are nearest the top, and the things furthest away are at the back. So his left eye is going to be behind all of the sort of right eye bits and bobs. But we could do with the beam, as we did before with if we just switch the modes, you can see what they are. We did adds for the right eye glow and the particle bloom. We could try something for this as well, just to help it kind of, oh, look at that, there you go, get like a burnout with the screen. And you can play around with them, choose one that you like. We might also do a very similar thing with the left eye particle bloom as well. Let's maybe make that an add. And then you can sort of see the background lightens up quite significantly. There we go, it's kind of burnt out. Fantastic. So now, as you are no doubt aware, there are always put lens flares in whenever they have these sort of heat vision effects. So we're going to make our very own lens flare. Okay, so we need to create a new solid. Make sure it's your comp size. Color doesn't really matter, but maybe make it black because we're going to use a blending mode. And let's call it lens flare. There we go. Just make sure it's on the top. And then we're going to come up to Effect, Generate, and Lens Flare. There we go. Now you have 3 options for the lens flare, and they all have varying effects. I might actually go for the first one. And what we can do now is if we change the blending mode down here from normal to something like screen, there we go, we'll be able to see through. And we're going to do our favourite trick of pick whipping again. So let's just open this up as well as our right eye one so we can get that position. And open up the lens flare, and we want the flare center. So center it on your eye, about where it should go. That's about right. And alt click on our little stopwatch again. That'll go red. Grab the pick whip and drag it down so that it is over the position. And there we go, it will set it. And now we should have the lens flare following the eye around. Kind of like bobbing up and down a bit there. Barely sort of doing what we want. We then will also want to just keyframe when we want the lens flare to start and stop, because obviously we don't want it burning away for the entirety of it. So we definitely want it to. In fact, we could look at our glow and see where we turn that one off. And yeah, there we go. So we can come back to our auto key, turn that on, play with our flare brightness. Like that. So we can either do it through the flare brightness, or we could even do it through the opacity of the layer, one or the other, it doesn't matter which. And come along a bit. And why not we push it up to something that's really bright. And then we want to turn it off, so just make sure we match up where the other one turns off. Turn the brightness down again. So maybe I want it to still be kind of bright, losing brightness, I guess. Flick this off if it gets a bit confusing seeing the both of them there. And let's put this up back up to 110. Ooh, nice and bright. Okay, so next thing to do is, this is a very, very perfect sort of a flare. It looks very, very fake. So we can actually also play with this blend with original just to kind of get it so it's a bit less obvious. Oh yeah, that's not too bad. But we're still getting very, very fine edges, defined edges even. So why don't we apply a blur to it? Let's choose a different type of blur this time. So we come up to Effect, Blur and Sharpen. And why don't we go to the old favourite, the Gaussian blur. And then we can just play around with the blurriness a bit. We don't want it too blurry, but that'll do. And there you have it. Our heat vision. So have fun with it, do what you want. You can even change the particle effects if you wanted to have sort of swells of fire. I mean, it doesn't have to be Superman, you could do anyone who has some amazing kind of ocular blasts. But thank you very much, I hope it's been helpful.